All my life, I've been a slave to knowledge, obsessed with uncovering the hidden, solving the unsolved. My name is Graham Thornton, and most archaeologists in my field consider me insane. My obsession with forgotten cults, ancient pagan religions, and artifacts that don't fit historical timelines has made many turn away from me. But when I received a letter from my old friend Jeremiah Dryden, everything changed. He had found something that could not only prove my theories, but open a door to a horror that should never have been revealed. Jeremiah had been my partner on many excavations, but his latest expedition was conducted in isolation from the academic world. He didn't share his work with anyone. His research focused on the mysterious legends of northern peoples who spoke of a sunken temple. According to ancient stories, this temple was not built by human hands, but was a place of worship for beings that existed long before mankind walked the earth. They called themselves the Children of the Deep. In his letter, Jeremiah wrote about a discovery in Greenland, an area that had been hidden under ice for millennia. While other expeditions sought artifacts elsewhere, Jeremiah aimed to prove that the legends of the sunken temple had real foundations. He believed he had found evidence of this ancient civilization, although he had not yet understood what these beings were. His final lines were troubling. Something is watching us. I feel it in every fiber of my being. We are approaching something terrible, Graham, but I can't stop. When I arrived at Jeremiah's camp, an unnatural cold greeted me, a cold that even my thick clothes could not keep at bay. The wind cut to the bone, and it felt as though it carried an ancient language that had long been forgotten by men. The camp was half empty. Several workers moved gloomily about, not speaking, avoiding eye contact. They avoided me, and only one of them said that Jeremiah was deep inside the cave. I decided to descend the next day. The night in the camp was restless. Every sound, even the slight rustling of the tent, seemed like an echo of something distant and terrible. The wind, blowing from the eastern side, made strange noises that sounded like whispers or even groans. At dawn, a few workers and I ventured into the ice caves. The first few hours were ordinary. The ice walls reflected the faint light of our lanterns, and our footsteps echoed in the narrow tunnels. However, the deeper we went, the more surreal the space around us became. The cold intensified, and the walls of the cave began to look as if they had been carved not by natural processes, but by human hands. We approached the entrance to a vast hall. The walls of the hall were covered in ancient symbols, but these were not symbols of human culture. They were something else, something so alien that even my experience couldn't help. The symbols resembled snakes, merging with waves, and beings with unnatural limbs and bulging eyes. They depicted scenes of worship to beings that stood on the edge of understanding. In the center of the hall stood a black altar, made of stone that absorbed the light from our lanterns. It seemed ancient, so old that it felt as though its origin was beyond time itself. Jeremiah stood by the altar, holding a manuscript in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes vacant, as though he were somewhere far beyond reality. He began muttering something, bowing his head to the manuscript. His words were quiet, but each of them struck me like a wave of icy water. Katagnarakar, Katagnarakar. The manuscript was written on ancient skin, which appeared imperishable. I tried to glance at it, but I felt sick just looking at the symbols, pulsing with a strange glow. Then I felt it, the heavy, pervasive fear that surged through my entire body. It seemed like the place itself was alive, and it was watching us. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from beneath the ground. The earth trembled, and the shadows in the corners of the hall began to thicken. I saw them move. They stretched out from the corners, creeping toward us, formless but clearly terrifying. I felt the darkness gliding across my skin, like the touch of some giant unseen tentacle. Jeremiah didn't notice anything around him. He kept chanting the mantra, and with every word, it seemed as if he was awakening something ancient and forgotten. Then, from the shadows, a formless figure emerged. It wasn't physical, but its presence was undeniable. It was like a silhouette that consumed all light and sound. Its presence was so overwhelming that my body froze, unable to move. Something unseen touched Jeremiah, and his body began to compress, as if being sucked into the darkness itself. His screams merged with the whispering we had heard before, and slowly, he disappeared into the abyss. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. My heart pounded wildly, and in panic, I fled. The tunnels of the cave grew darker, and the whispering followed me. The wind blowing from the walls sounded like the voice of those forgotten beings. Every step became more difficult, but I ran as if possessed. When I finally emerged to the surface, the sun barely peeked over the horizon, but the cold did not relent. I felt that the horror was still with me. The whisper continues to haunt me at night. I don't know how much longer I can hold on, but I know one thing: that whisper will never stop. My return to civilization felt like an escape from another world. I was picked up by fishermen when I reached the nearest port. They stared at me in silence, asking no questions, though I was sure my face bore the marks of the horror I had faced. I spent a few days in a hotel, trying to recover from what I had experienced, but each night, as soon as the darkness fell, that whisper returned. I heard it over and over again, as if some creature beneath the earth continued to pull me back. I started keeping a journal, trying to record every event before they faded from my memory. With each word I wrote, something larger unfolded before me. I felt that this story was not finished. The ancient forces we awakened in that hall still live somewhere deep in our world, and now they know about us. Just a few weeks after my return, I began receiving strange messages. Anonymous letters arrived in my mailbox, containing records of ancient rituals and mentions of beings similar to those described in Jeremiah's manuscript. Most of them were written in languages I could barely understand, but they shared common traits. All pointed to the existence of an ancient sect that worshipped beings from the depths. I sought out scholars and esoteric groups to find answers, but each one I approached either withdrew or turned away from me. It became clear that this knowledge was dangerous not only to the mind, but also to the soul. One specialist in occult sciences, whom I met in Paris, warned me. These beings live not only in our world, they exist beyond the boundaries of reality. They are part of something that should never have been part of our existence. Since then, every day has been a battle between the desire to learn more and the fear of uncovering even greater horrors. Unable to find peace in my life, I made the decision to return to Greenland. I couldn't leave Jeremiah trapped in the horror that had consumed him, but this time, I prepared better. I found several archaeologists who, at their own risk, agreed to accompany me. We gathered the best equipment and hired local guides who knew every ice crevice along the coast. When we returned to the same cave, something immediately felt different. The eerie silence was even more oppressive. It was as if the earth itself knew we were approaching a place that should never have been disturbed. The entrance to the cave now looked different. The ice crystals that once adorned the walls had melted, leaving dark, damp voids. As we ventured deeper into the tunnels, the whisper returned, but this time it was clearer and closer. I could feel the earth breathing beneath our feet. We found the hall where Jeremiah had stood last time, but now it was different. The altar was shattered, and the black stone was cracked, with a strange, translucent liquid seeping from it. The symbols on the walls had changed, becoming more distorted, as if they had been drawn not by humans, but by something else. My companions began to panic. One of them, an archaeologist named Elias, even suggested we turn back immediately, but I knew stopping would mean leaving all the answers behind forever. And so we pressed on, approaching the heart of the cave. At the very bottom of the cave, we found another passage that had previously been hidden beneath the ice. When we entered, the whisper filled the air again. But this time, it was not just a sound. It was a presence. I was engulfed in terror, but I felt the answers were near. As we ventured further, I saw it. A massive, ancient archway made of an unknown material that glowed from within. The same symbols carved on the walls of the first hall now pulsed with a living light. The archway seemed to be a portal to another world, an entrance to an unknown dimension where these beings lived. My companions stood frozen, paralyzed by the horror of what they were seeing. I took a step forward, unable to stop, feeling myself drawn in by the force emanating from the archway. I didn't know what lay beyond, but I knew it was watching us. Then, from the arch, emerged the same formless creature I had seen before. It wasn't physical, but its presence was undeniable. It was like a shadow stretching from another dimension, and this shadow enveloped us with its cold gaze. I saw my companions, one by one, fall to their knees, entranced by the horrific vision. I suddenly realized the full truth. We weren't just exploring an ancient temple. We had awakened something that should never have existed in our reality. This was not just an archaeological discovery or a relic of a forgotten civilization. We had opened a door to something otherworldly, something that exists beyond the boundaries of our world and comprehension. It had been watching us through the ages, waiting for its moment. And now, that moment had come. As the creature emerged from the arch, I felt as though our presence in the cave had become part of this horror. We were no longer observers. We were now part of this abyss. This entity didn't just exist in another dimension. It was consuming our reality, reshaping it on its own terms. I felt my body contract in fear, as though the very space around me was becoming denser, taut with the presence of the dark entity. My companions were broken. One by one, they fell to their knees, as if losing control of their own bodies. Their eyes became vacant, and their faces froze in expressions of terror. They no longer belonged to themselves. I could feel this horror invading their minds, and perhaps mine as well. Though I tried to escape, this dread, this whisper, had already begun to root itself in my consciousness. When I finally escaped the cave, fleeing from the shadow, I understood that there was no real escape. The darkness had not left me. It haunts me every night, in every dream, in every ominous whisper of the wind. I hear it, even as I sit here at this desk, writing these words. The whisper does not stop. It penetrates the silence, barely audible, but always present. I know it's only a matter of time before it finds me again. Each night grows shorter, each glimmer of light fades, and with each passing day, the fear consumes me more and more. I'm trying to leave this record as a warning, but I realize there's no warning that can save me or anyone else. There is no salvation. When the darkness comes for me at last, I will become a part of it. The whisper will find me. And then, there will be no escape.